My name is Natalie Brooks. On the night of my birthday, my husband Daniel Whitmore stood at the head of a long table in a private room at an upscale steakhouse downtown. 40 people surrounded him, partners, colleagues, friends, all gathered for what I believed was a celebration. Daniel raised his glass and smiled at me. "Congratulations, failure," he said. "We are finished?" For a moment no one reacted. Then laughter broke out loud and sharp. Glasses clinked. Someone cheered. It was the kind of laughter that comes from people who already know the ending. At Daniel's side sat a woman I had never met. Her hand rested easily on his arm as if it belonged there. No one looked surprised. No one looked confused. I did not cry. I did not argue. I did not ask for an explanation. I reached into my purse and pulled out a single black envelope. I walked the length of the table and slid it toward him. "Before you celebrate," I said calmly, "you might want to explain to your sisters why their tuition disappears tonight, to your parents why their house and cars vanish, and to your partners why the firm collapses before the check arrives." The laughter stopped. Phones began to buzz across the table. Someone stood too fast and knocked over a chair. Daniel stared at the envelope, his smile frozen, his confidence cracking. I smoothed my dress and turned away. As I walked out of the room, I did not look back. I did not need to. That was the moment everything he built began to fall apart. But to understand how I could sit there so calm while my life was being publicly dismantled, you need to know what came before. The years of silence. The years of shrinking. The years where I learned that being quiet does not mean being weak. That night was not about revenge. It was about the end of pretending. Before I became Daniel Whitmore's wife, I was Natalie Brooks. I grew up in a small town in Ohio where life moved slowly and everyone knew your business whether you wanted them to or not. My father died when I was young and my mother worked double shifts as a nurse to keep us afloat. She taught me how to survive without saying much. You show up, you work hard, you do not complain. I learned early that being quiet made people underestimate you. Teachers praised the loud, confident students while I sat in the back observing patterns and solving problems faster than anyone realized. Numbers made sense to me. They followed rules. They told the truth if you paid attention long enough. I carried that mindset through college and into graduate school. While others chased recognition, I focused on building things that work, models, systems, solutions that could turn uncertainty into clarity. I believed effort spoke for itself, that if you contributed enough, people would notice eventually. Looking back, I know how common that belief is, especially for women. We are taught to wait our turn, to be patient, to trust that fairness will arrive on its own. I did not see patience as a risk. I saw it as maturity. By the time I met Daniel, I was proud of my work but still uncomfortable claiming space. I was capable but careful, confident but quiet. That combination made me easy to overlook and easy to love for the wrong reasons. I thought I was building a future. I did not realize I was slowly learning how to disappear. I met Daniel Whitmore during graduate school at a small industry seminar. He was one of the guest speakers, confident, polished, the kind of man who spoke as if the future already belonged to him. After the session, he approached me with a question about a model I had presented earlier that day. It was specific, thoughtful, and rare. We started talking after that. Coffee turned into long walks. Walks turned into late dinners where he spoke about the firm he wanted to build. A place that would be smarter, faster, and more ethical than anything else out there. He said he wanted a partner. Not a helper, not a supporter, a partner. I believed him because I wanted to, because his ambition felt like direction and his confidence felt like safety. When he talked about success, he used the word we. When he talked about the future, he said together. When we married, it felt like momentum, not sacrifice. I imagined a life where our strengths complemented each other, his ability to lead and my ability to build. What I did not notice then were the small omissions. How he praised my intelligence in private but redirected credit in public. How partnership always meant contribution but never ownership. At the time, those details felt unimportant, like minor compromises you make when you trust someone. We moved quickly after the wedding, a larger house, a growing circle of professional friends, more expectations quietly settling into place. I stepped into the role everyone seemed comfortable assigning me, supportive, calm, reliable. Daniel liked to say I balanced him. What he really meant was that I made his life easier while he chased recognition. Back then I still believed patience was proof of love. I did not yet understand how easily patience can be mistaken for permission. From the outside, our life looked successful in every way that mattered. Daniel launched the firm not long after we married. A modern office downtown, glass walls, open layouts, the kind of place that suggested confidence and growth before anyone asked questions. Clients arrived in tailored suits. Investors listened closely. The firm expanded faster than expected. What no one saw was how that success was built. While Daniel spent his days pitching, networking, and telling stories about vision, I stayed behind the scenes building the seed vine that made those promises real. Late nights in our home office, turning raw data into models that could predict risk and opportunity with unusual accuracy. I did not support the firm. I built its core. The system identified patterns others missed. It reduced losses, increased returns, and gave Daniel the confidence to speak boldly. Every major account stayed because of it. Every profitable quarter traced back to work I had done quietly and alone. At meetings, Daniel explained my work using simplified language he had memorized. When technical questions came up, he redirected smoothly, then answered just well enough that no one pressed further. He introduced me as operations support, sometimes as his assistant, never as the architect. I smiled. I poured coffee. I adjusted slides. At home, I told myself this was temporary, that once the firm stabilized, once the pressure eased, he would acknowledge the truth, that love meant trusting the process. But the months turned into years and nothing changed. At dinners, people praised Daniel for his brilliance. He accepted the compliments easily as if they belonged only to him. I sat beside him, nodding politely, invisible in a room built on my work. I told myself recognition was not important. That teamwork meant shared success, even if the credit was uneven. Looking back, I see how familiar this pattern is. Women carrying invisible labor in marriages and careers, believing that patience will eventually be rewarded. The firm thrived. Daniel's reputation grew. And with every success, the distance between what I knew and what the world believed became impossible to ignore. That was when I began to understand how quietly a life can be rewritten while you are busy keeping things running. The first clear warning did not arrive with a fight or an accusation. It came on an ordinary day that felt like every other one. That morning, Daniel rushed through the kitchen, already dressed, phone in hand, barely noticing the coffee I had set out. He told me he needed the conference room ready early for an investor lunch, and left without waiting for my reply. At the office, I arranged folders and checked the projector while two younger executives talked just outside the glass wall. They did not realize I could hear them. "Daniel is bringing in his old college friend," one of them said. "Chief strategist. Big shift." "About time," the other replied. "And what about her?" "Still playing assistant," they laughed. The words landed harder than I expected. That night, while backing up files at home, I noticed a folder buried deep in the system labeled Reorg. Inside were draft plans, new organizational charts, future roles clearly defined. Daniel's name sat at the top. His college friend appeared beside him. My name was nowhere. Not in technology, not in operations, not anywhere at all. One memo mentioned streamlining and removing redundant positions once certain personal matters were resolved. Personal matters. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet room, feeling a cold clarity settle in. This was not about growth. It was about removal. I was not being overlooked. I was being planned out of existence. And for the first time, I understood that staying silent would not protect me. It would erase me. A few days after I found the reorg folder, I went to a small cafe near the office for lunch. It was the kind of place people chose when they did not want to be seen. I had just sat down when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Daniel's assistant was there, speaking softly with another woman. They were close enough that I did not need to turn around to recognize the excitement in her tone. "The birthday dinner is all set," she said. "Private room downtown. He wants everything perfect." The other woman laughed. "So that is when he finally does it?" "Absolutely," she replied. "He has been planning it for months, making sure everything is moved around so she has no leverage when it is over." I stopped eating. "She still thinks it is a celebration," the woman said. "Poor thing," the assistant answered. "Everyone knows about Claire. Everyone except her." Claire. The name settled into place like the final piece of a puzzle I had been avoiding. I sat very still as they talked about seating charts and guest lists as if they were planning a show. Because that is exactly what it was. That night, Daniel came home late. He smelled faintly of perfume that was not mine. He kissed my cheek, distracted, and went straight to the shower. I stood alone in the kitchen holding a glass of water I never drank. The affair was not an accident. The timing was not cruel coincidence. The birthday dinner was designed. He wanted witnesses. He wanted laughter. He wanted me small and embarrassed in front of everyone who mattered to him. What surprised me most was not the betrayal. It was how calm I felt once the truth was clear. The guessing was over. And in that stillness I stopped asking how to save the marriage. I started asking how to save myself. The next morning I reached out to someone I trusted from my past. Her name was Rachel Miller. We had studied together in graduate school before she moved into forensic accounting. When I told her I needed to talk, she did not ask questions. She just told me where to meet her. I laid everything out. The reorganization plans, the affair, the birthday dinner meant to humiliate me. I spoke calmly as if I were describing a case instead of my own life. Rachel listened without interrupting. When I finished, she looked at me and said something I will never forget. "Natalie, he is not leaving you, he is erasing you." The words hit harder than any accusation. Driving home that night I did not cry. I did not feel angry. I felt resolved. For years I had tried to be patient, believing that loyalty would protect me. I finally understood that loyalty to someone who is dismantling you is not love. It is self-abandonment. I did not confront Daniel. I did not demand answers. I did not change my routines. I made coffee the next morning. I smiled through meetings. I nodded at family dinners. But inside something had shifted. I stopped trying to be understood. I focused on being prepared. Because when someone is quietly planning your removal, the only real mistake is letting them believe you will never notice. And I had noticed everything. I began at night when the house was quiet and Daniel was distracted or asleep. I did not rush. I treated it like every serious project I had ever built, with patience, structure, and clear boundaries. First, I protected my work. I separated my systems from the firm without changing how anything looked on the surface. Copies of code documentation and development timelines moved to encrypted drives. Patents I had filed years earlier under my own name were reviewed and updated. Ownership clarified. Nothing flashy, nothing illegal, just precise. Then I created distance. Through legal channels Daniel never questioned, I formed small holding companies. Ordinary names registered where paperwork blended into background noise. These were not weapons. They were shelters, places where my work could exist without interference. During the day I stayed invisible. I followed instructions. I attended meetings. I kept the rhythm of our life exactly the same. No one suspects a woman who does not make noise. Over the years I had helped Daniel's family with investments and trusts, education funds, property refinancing. I knew where everything connected, which agreements relied on trust rather than scrutiny. At a family dinner his father complained about the lake house loan. I offered a solution through an old contact. Better terms, fewer complications. They were grateful. They signed. Daniel's sisters asked for help optimizing their education trusts. I handled the paperwork efficiently. Everything looked cleaner, more secure than before. What they did not see were the threads tying everything together. Threads only I could pull. It was not sabotage. It was structure. Like pulling a single stitch from a sweater, nothing happens at first. Then slowly everything loosens. At night the weight of the secret pressed on me. There were moments I wondered if I had gone too far. Then I remembered the word redundant. This was not revenge. Preparation is not cruelty. Preparation is self-respect. And by the time Daniel realized what I had done, there would be nothing left for him to undo. A week before my birthday, my mother came to visit. She arrived on a gray afternoon with a small worn suitcase and the same steady presence that had carried me through childhood. Daniel greeted her politely, then announced he would be away for the weekend on a golf trip with clients. When the door closed behind him, the house felt quieter than usual. The next morning we sat at the kitchen table with coffee and eggs. Sunlight moved slowly across the counter. For once I did not rush to clean up. My mother looked at me for a long moment and asked a simple question. How long has he made you feel like you have to earn your place here? I froze. She did not accuse or raise her voice. She waited, and that was enough. The words spilled out. The reorganization plans, the affair, the birthday dinner, the quiet work I had been doing to protect myself. She listened without interruption, her hand resting over mine. When I finished, she nodded. Your father's first wife waited too long, she said softly. She thought love meant endurance. By the time it ended, she had lost more than money. She had lost herself. She stood and pulled me into a hug. We spent the afternoon gathering copies of documents, essentials, things I might need quickly. We hid them where Daniel never looked. When she left, she held my face gently. When you are ready, she said, you will not be alone. After she was gone, the house felt emptier. But I felt steadier than I had in years. The night of my birthday arrived quietly. Daniel laid out dresses on the bed as if he were choosing a costume for me. He told me to wear something appropriate for the occasion. I chose a simple black dress from the back of my closet one I owned before him, when my clothes were about how I felt, not how I looked beside someone else. We drove downtown in silence. His phone kept lighting up and he angled the screen away from me. I watched the city pass and felt an unexpected calm settle in. The private room at the steakhouse was already full when we arrived. Partners, colleagues, friends, and their polished spouses filled the space. Every face belonged to Daniel's world, not one belonged to mine. He guided me to my seat near the far end of the table. His place waited at the head. Beside him sat Claire Monroe, perfectly composed, her smile brief and knowing. Dinner moved slowly, wine was poured, stories were told, laughter rose and fell on Daniel's cue. Claire touched his sleeve at just the right moments, a silent claim. When dessert arrived, a single candle flickered in the center of the table. The room grew expectant. Daniel stood and tapped his glass. Before we toast Natalie's birthday, he said, I have something to say. He turned toward me. Congratulations, failure, he said. We are finished. Laughter broke out, instantly sharp and loud. I stood. The sound faded as I walked toward him. I reached into my purse, pulled out a black envelope and slid it across the table. Before you celebrate, I said evenly, you may want to explain to your sisters why their tuition disappears tonight, to your parents why their house and cars vanish, and to your partners why the firm collapses before the check arrives. Silence filled the room. I turned and walked out without looking back. That was the last moment I allowed myself to be invisible. I did not rush when I left the restaurant. I walked down the hallway into the elevator and out into the cool night air. My phone began to vibrate almost immediately, but I ignored it. I crossed the street to my car and drove away without looking back. I did not go home. Months earlier, I had secured a small condo near the lake through one of the holding companies. Daniel never noticed. He assumed my occasional nights away were spent visiting my mother or staying at cheap hotels. The space was quiet and simple. It felt like a place that belonged to me. I made tea and opened my laptop. The dashboard lit up, one notice after another. Access permissions revoked, loans called in. Systems locking behind protocols only I could authorize. The firm platform went dark, first, backups failing silently behind it. Through the restaurant windows across the street, I could see confusion spreading. People standing. Phones pressed to ears, Daniel's father pacing. A tray drop. A chair knocked over. There was no sense of triumph. Only stillness. This was not destruction, it was consequence. For 2 days I stayed there in the quiet, letting the structure do its work. I ignored the calls and messages. On the third morning, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole I saw Daniel. His suit was wrinkled. His face looked older than I remembered. I opened the door but stayed in the frame. Please, he said. Please, what I asked calmly. Everything is gone, he whispered. I nodded. This is what happens, I said, when you build your life on something that was never yours. Daniel did not come alone the next time. Lawyers followed. Emails arrived filled with threats, warnings, and accusations meant to scare me into giving back control. They spoke about court reputations and public fallout, as if volume could replace truth. I did not respond emotionally. My attorney replied with facts. Time-stamped development logs, patent filings registered under my name years before the firm existed, emails where Daniel asked me to explain my own system so he could repeat it to investors, recordings of meetings where my work was presented as his vision. The threats stopped. Then the board called an emergency meeting. I walked into the glass conference room not as a wife or an assistant, but as the person who held the foundation of everything they relied on. Daniel sat at the table, pale and silent. His college friend avoided my eyes. I connected my laptop to the screen and laid out the ownership structure clearly and calmly. Every system that generates your revenue, I said, belongs to me. The room went still. Someone asked what I wanted. I did not raise my voice. I did not negotiate endlessly. I gave them two options: a clean transfer on my terms, or the complete collapse of the firm once regulators and competitors stepped in. They did not argue. They signed. Not because I demanded power, but because they finally understood who had always held it. I did not stay after the meeting. Once the documents were signed, I closed my laptop, stood up, and walked out of the building without looking back. The glass walls, the long table, the echoes of old meetings all belonged to a life I had already outgrown. Within months, I sold the core system to a competing firm. The deal made headlines, but I did not celebrate it. The number mattered only because it bought me freedom. I leased a modest office overlooking the lake and started over under my own name, Brooks Analytics. No borrowed reputation, no shadows, just the work. This time I chose my team carefully. I hired women I had met over the years who reminded me of myself. Brilliant, overlooked, patient to a fault. Women whose ideas had been quietly used by others without credit. We worked side by side. Credit was named. Contributions were visible. No one disappeared so someone else could shine. Our first client signed within weeks. Then another. The returns outperformed anything Daniel's firm had ever produced, not because we worked harder, but because we worked honestly. For the first time, success felt clean. I was no longer trying to prove I belonged in the room. I was building a room where belonging was never questioned. That was the real beginning. Not of a company, but of a life that finally felt like mine. Several months later, I saw Daniel again by chance. It was at a business conference downtown. He stood behind a small booth for a minor advisory firm, wearing a suit that no longer fit quite right. His smile was polite, strained, offered to people who barely slowed their steps. When our eyes met, he looked away first. I walked into a full room to give my talk. I spoke about systems and strategy, but also about ownership. About how ideas are often born in quiet places and how easily they are taken when the person who built them stays silent. Afterward, women approached me one by one. Some shared stories that sounded painfully familiar. Others simply said thank you. With part of what I earned, I started a small foundation. Quiet grants for women whose work had been overlooked. Legal help to protect what they create. Mentorship without ego or conditions. I did not do it out of anger. I did it because no one should have to disappear in order to belong. Standing by my office window one evening watching the lake turn silver, I thought about how much my life had changed. I did not destroy anything. I dismantled what was false and built something real in its place. Sometimes betrayal clears the space for your truest self to emerge. And in that space, you do not just survive. You finally live. If this story resonated with you, stay with us at The Art of Revenge. Like, share, and comment below and tell us where you are listening from.